Philip Ingram is still with me. Get his thoughts on what my next guest has to say, and we're delighted to welcome Jake Wallis Simons to the show. He's the author of the brilliant book Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred and what to do about it. He's also our columnist on The Telegraph. Very good afternoon to you, Jake.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Extraordinary reports coming out of Gaza. Of course, very difficult to get independent information out of Gaza. Everything is very much controlled by the Hamas war machine, the government there, including death figures and the like after Israeli bombing raids. But armed gangs in Gaza have called for an uprising against not Israel, not the IDF, but against Hamas. 2 days of protests so far. What do you make of these reports?
Well, the first observation I'd make is that it's no exaggeration to say there have been more protests against Hamas in Gaza over the last 2 days than in London over the last 17 months, which tells you a lot. And this is on the day when the Manchester Student Union, by the way, has just passed a motion supporting armed resistance, i.e. supporting Hamas, even though its own people in Gaza no longer support Hamas. That just goes to show the moral bankruptcy that we face in this country. But that aside, you know, the Gazans, after 17 months of suffering, and of course years and years of brainwashing and intimidation by their jihadi overlords Hamas, who are basically no different from Islamic State. They stem from the same ideological source in the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. They're finally finding their voices. And it's not they didn't have voices before. I mean, you know, the Gaza is a brainwashed population. There's a lot of radicalism there, but there have always been people who've objected to Hamas. One or two of them I know personally. I've been in touch with them throughout the war via WhatsApp, on the phone and so forth. In fact, they put me onto this initially, sending me videos of these protests because it wasn't being covered in the BBC.
Yeah.
But they're finally coming out in force. Hamas is so weak that they're finally emboldened to come out and show that they just don't want any more suffering visited upon them by these jihadi maniacs.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly brave of them to do this, because we are talking about jihadi maniacs. But this is the thing, we're always told, well, you know, Hamas is different from the civilians. That said, we saw all of these awful videos put out, by the way, by Hamas themselves, of not just of what they did on October the 7th in Israel, but the actual, when victims, you know, old ladies, young women, you know, basically often, you know, already battered and bruised, some appearing to already been raped, you know, gang rape, being paraded through towns in Gaza, and normal, ordinary people in Gaza cheering, whistling, spitting on the victims of that October the 7th attack, which made a lot of us think, like, wake up and go, realise that, you know, Hamas weren't acting completely alone. We know that an awful lot of the hostages have been held in civilian homes, doctors, so-called journalists' homes, supportive of Hamas. So it's a big concern. But then you do wonder, Hamas was originally elected as the power, the governing power in Gaza, but that was, what, 2005? There hasn't been an election since. If they're so sure of their support, you'd think they would have been holding elections regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important not to be naive about this. We're not talking about a strip populated by Liberal Democrats. You know, we're talking about...
They're pretty extreme these days, to be fair, Jake.
Well, that's true. I mean, you know, as much as we might want to send them to Gaza, I'm not sure that they'd fit in that well. But look, you know, in Gaza, it's not a democratic society. None of the Middle East is, apart from Israel. They don't have a democratic tradition. And what they have is a tribal society that's run by clans and warlords, which is one of the reasons why our nation-state borders that we drew haven't really been very successful in the Middle East, because they cross the lines of tribes. And in Gaza, there are these big clans which derive a lot of local tribal support, which have not been very friendly towards Hamas. In fact, last year, there was a plan to try to use them to take over Gaza after Hamas went. Hamas got wind of this and then beheaded the leader of the Dogmush clan, the biggest clan in Gaza, and many of his followers. And after that, they all pledged loyalty to Hamas. So it works on the basis of power and loyalty.
Yeah, and the willingness to use violence to enforce their views. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? But we know, you know, figures in the Palestinian Authority would like to be, you know, quite happily oust Hamas and take over themselves. But again, there isn't. It's the thing. There isn't, as you say, you know, a Lib Dem option. You know, there isn't a moderate option. There's just a least extreme option available.
That's right. I mean, look, I don't want to tar all Gazans with the same brush. I mean, I know one or two of them, and they are decent people, as far as I know. I've been friends with one or two for a long time, since the day I was on the road as a foreign correspondent. But by and large, there's a lot of radicalism. There's a lot of backwards thinking. There is not much in the way of education, modern democracy, democratic values, and Western values like we have.
Well, no, because these are Western values. This thing, everyone always thinks these things are everywhere. They're not. They're Western values. They are unique.
Yeah,
they are unique to our culture.
Exactly. There's something called the Wickhamist fallacy, by which people who went to Winchester think that Johnny Foreigner naturally is a good chap deep down, and just allow him to be and he'll become a democratic ally. That's been proven not to be the case over the last 20 or 30, 40 years.
Absolutely.
So we need to be dealing with reality going forward, I think.
Absolutely. Always so good to talk to you, Jake Wallis Simons. Thank you very much indeed.